Malcolm Marie, your favorite big sister, mentor, and life coach. Today we're going to discuss the daughters of Zelophehad. Earlier this week, I was driving and talking to the Father and about a situation that was in my heart, and he put in my spirit the daughters of Zelophehad. So I had to consider that. I had to consider, okay, what about these daughters? And, like most of us, we probably all heard this story. But one of the things we have to do with Torah, right? Torah is how we walk, is how we're governed. It teaches us boundaries and limitations. It teaches us self-control. It teaches us problem resolution. It teaches us how to love, how to be good people towards the Father. Towards each other, how to be good children towards the Father. But there's some very practical things about Torah, right? It tells us how to function in community. And the daughters of Zelophehad are a part of the story. They come in at the part of Israel's story when we are getting the land and the Father is instituting the law of inheritance. So before we jump into their story, let's take a look at where this all begins in the book of Numbers by Midbar, chapter 26. I'm going to read verses 1 to 4, and then we're going to drop down to verse 29, and then drop down again to verses 33 and 34. Hallelujah. And it came to pass after the plague that Yahweh spake unto Moshe and unto Eleazar, the son of Aharon, the Kohen, saying, Take the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel from 20 years old and upward throughout their father's house, all that are able to go to war in Israel. And Moshe and Eleazar the Kohen spake with them in the plains of Moab by Jordan near Jericho, saying, Take the sum of the people from 20 years old and upward, as Yah commanded Moshe and the children of Israel, which went forth out of the land of Mitzrayim. So let's highlight some facts here, right? They're going to count the whole nation of Israel, but they're specifically counting men. And they're counting men who are at least 20 years old and able and fit to go to war. Let's drop down to verse 29. Between verses 4 and 28, he has gone through all the other tribes, but now we're going to get to the tribe of Zelophehad, which is Manasseh, which is the half tribe from Joseph's sons. Ephraim and Manasseh were half tribes. So this is the counting of Manasseh. Verse 29. Of the sons of Manasseh, of Machir, the family of the Machirites, and Machir begot Gilead. Of Gilead came the family of the Gileadites. Okay, now let's drop down to verse 33, because now we're talking about the house of Zelophehad. Verse 33. And Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, had no sons, but daughters. And the names of the daughters of Zelophehad were Machlah, Noah, Haglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. These are the families of Manasseh, and those that were numbered of them, 52,700. Okay, so from the whole tribe of Manasseh, there were over 52,000 men. Let's drop down to verse 51 to 56. At this point, the count is complete over the whole nation of Israel, except for the Levites and anybody that was any male that was under the age of 20. Those were not a part of the count for the inheritance laws. All right, verse 51. These were the number of the children of Israel, 600,000 and 1,730. And Yah spake unto Moshe, saying, Unto these the land shall be divided for an inheritance according to the number of names. To many you shall give the more inheritance, and to few you shall give the less inheritance. To every one shall his inheritance be given according to those that are numbered of him. Notwithstanding, the land shall be divided by lot. According to the names of the tribes of their fathers, they shall inherit. According to the lot shall the possession thereof be divided between few and many. All right, so let's highlight some facts. We want to keep some things in the forefront of our mind. Who's getting land here, right? It is men for the sake of their families. And these were going to be their eternal possession in the promised land. Now let's take a look at chapter 27, where we meet these daughters. We're going to read verses 1 through 11. The scripture says, Then came the daughters of Zelophehad, the son of Hefer, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, of the families of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. And I like the way, it starts out, because they give his lineage. He's a part of the tribe of Joseph, okay? And these are the names of his daughters: Machlah, Noah, Haglah, and Milcah, and Tirzah. And they stood before Moshe, and before Eleazar the Cohen, and before the princes and all the congregation by the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. I just picture that, right? Just imagine standing before Moshe. And it's not like a one-on-one conversation. You're standing there with Eleazar, the priest, the Cohen. And then you're standing with the princes, the heads of the assembly of the tribes. And these 5 women are standing before them. And this is what they say. Verse 3. Our father died in the wilderness, and he was not in the company of them that gathered themselves together against Yah in the company of Korah, but died in his own sin and had no sons. So there was a situation earlier in Torah where Korah rose up against Yahweh, and Yahweh destroyed him and his whole household and everyone that was a part of that rebellion. So they prefaced the conversation about their father by saying that their father was not a part of that rebellion. He did not die because he was a part of the Korah rebellion, okay? And they pose a question, which is a very wise technique when you're presenting an indiscretion or a fault to a leader or an elder, is to pose it as a question. It says, why should the name of our father be done away from among his family because he has no sons, right? So they come to Moshe not even saying, why don't we get land, right? They're not coming, we need somewhere to live. They come defending their father's name. And we could go a whole another way with this spiritually, obviously, but we always want to begin with the simple meaning of what we're reading, and that is, this is an account of what actually happened. These daughters came before Moshe defending their father's name and his legacy and what rightfully they believed belonged to their father. Verse 4 again. Why should the name of our father be done away from among his family because he has no son? It's kind of ironic. Like, is that his fault? Right? He didn't choose the sex of his children, right? He just had children. It just so happened he only had daughters. Give us, therefore, a possession among the brethren of our father. So these 5 sisters didn't just come before Moshe and were like, hey, did you forget about us? You have to kind of imagine they had a conversation and they thought about it, they spoke about it, and they had a suggestion. They didn't just come to Moshe empty-handed and say, hey, this is our problem, now what you going to do to fix it? They came with a suggestion, and their suggestion wasn't unfair, right? They're not asking to take away from anything. They're just saying, well, our father's a part of this tribe. Why not get a part of what's given to this tribe in honor of our father's name? Verse 5. And Moshe brought their cause before Yah. Significant. And Yah spoke to Moshe, right? Use your imagination. Yah goes before the Most High and tells and recites to him, recounts to him exactly what just happened. And Abba's listening. Abba listened. He, Shema. And then he spoke. In verse 7 it says, the daughters of Zelophehad speak right. You shall surely get a possession of an inheritance among their father's brethren, and you shall cause the inheritance of their father to pass on to them. So you know what Abba gave them? Exactly what they suggested. They had an idea, and Abba said, that's fair. That's fair. And that's exactly what Abba gave them. But then this is what's interesting. In verse 8, we have one of the first amendments in Torah. I'm not saying it's the first one because I wasn't studying amendments, but you know, when we think about law, we have the Constitution, and it has, you know, the Bill of Rights, and then it has all these constitutional amendments, because an amendment is, oh, we didn't think about that, let's put that in, or we need to include this, let's put this in. And so now they added amendments. And so now here we have in Torah an amendment being added, because before the law was that the land was going to be divided and a portion was going to be given to the men according to the size of their families, and they would get the land. But now, because there's a situation brought to light that Yahweh had to add an amendment to Torah, to the inheritance laws. And this is what he says in verse 8. And you shall speak unto the children of Israel, saying, if a man die and have no son, then you shall cause his inheritance to pass unto his daughter. And if he has no daughter, then you shall give his inheritance unto his brethren. And if he had no brethren, then you shall give his inheritance unto his father's brethren. And if his father has no brethren, then he shall give his inheritance unto his kinsman that is next to him of his family, and he shall possess it. And it shall be unto the children of Israel a statute of judgment, as Yahweh commanded Moshe. So this amendment, think about it. It didn't only affect if a man only had daughters. This even affect if a man didn't even have children. We see that this commandment, Yahweh looked deeper into other situations where the passing of the land would not have been so easy because of lack of a daughter, and even lack of a son. Because if you had no son, you would have fallen into this category of now it would go to your brethren somewhere along your lineage, your family line. So as I was, reading this story, thinking about this story, you ask yourself questions, and you have to ask, well, didn't Yahweh realize that this was going to be a situation? Like, was Yahweh short-sighted? Did he miss something? And I prayed about that, and I wanted to understand, like, why, Abba, why did you do that? I had my own ideas, but I wanted to know why he did that. There's so many commandments where Yahweh he defends, boundaries and landmarks and property and territory, and so didn't he consider that Zelophehad was not going to be a part of this nation anymore, as far as having a possession? And of course he did, right? Of course he did. He's Yahweh. He knows all things. So I, sat with this, and a couple of things that came. Abba gives us opportunities. I believe the Father gives us opportunities. Yahweh is a mighty one where, as humans, he tries us, he tests us. He wants to see what we're going to do. He gives us room and opportunity to make choices and decisions. And I believe that this was an opportunity for the daughters of Zelophehad to do something. They could have done nothing, and they could have accepted the judgment and just been like, oh, well, so much for our father's name, because, they're going to, they would be, best case scenario, each of them would be married to other people and become a part of their, husband's territory and land and all different kinds of stuff. So it really was no skin off their nose, but they were fighting for their father's name. What are you going to do for your father's name? Right? And we can take that spiritual. We know that, right? The first thing comes to my mind, the third commandment of not taking Yahweh's name in vain. But that's for another study. I really want to keep this practical, right? These ladies, 5 of them, had an opportunity to stand up and to make something that was only obvious to them known to leadership, because it was not obvious to them. Moses was a man. Moses was, he's just reading the script. He's just doing what Yahweh said. Well, Yahweh told me count the men. And that's what I'm doing. Can't fault him for that. He's following directions. But Moses didn't consider that when the name of Zelophehad came up, that there was going to be a blank next to his name. We can't imply Moses' thought process. But Moses didn't raise the issue. It didn't affect Moses. It affected the daughters of Zelophehad. And they did something. They made their situation known to those who had no idea about this situation. Moses had no idea what it was going to feel like to have his father's name removed out of the territories of Israel. These daughters had to do something. They had to say something. Sometimes, now this is the practicality of it for us as believers, not just women. This is something all believers have to learn and practice. That sometimes you have to be the one to say what's not so obvious, even to those who you think should know. And we're talking about the decision makers, your father, your husband, spiritual leadership, your boss, your parent, right? Human beings are human beings. We're not God. We're not all-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful. We only know that comes across our 5 senses. That's all we know, right? And whatever the Ruach reveals to us. But unless I know how this is going to affect you, right? If I say everyone in my house has to wake up at 5 o'clock and pray, which I would never say that, but let's say that's my law, right? Law. Everyone has to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and we have to pray. But I don't realize that one of my children, this is hypothetical, come home from work at 1 a.m. and they're just getting to sleep at 2 a.m. And so they're not going to be able to wake up at 5 a.m. for prayer. Right? But unless that child says, hey, Ima, I'm just falling asleep at 2 a.m. I can't get up at 5 a.m. Can we get up at 10 a.m.? Can we pray together as a family at 10 a.m.? And I'd be like, oh man, I didn't even consider that. And there's all kinds of scenarios that we've all done that. I mean, we've all probably done that ourselves. Make decisions and not realize how it affects other people until that person says something and bring it to our attention. Practically, that's one of the things I'm learning from the door of Zelophehad. We have to share the blind spots that people may have, plain and simple. And that doesn't mean that the person, the decision maker, like in this case, Moshe, is bad and evil and wicked. No, it was a blind spot. But these daughters, they did something. They acted on it. And Yahweh was pleased because Yahweh said they spoke right. Makes me think about Esther. My favorite verse, one of my favorite verses in the scriptures, Esther chapter 4, verse 14. And the last clause says, who knows whether you are come to the kingdom for such a time as this? So this is Mordecai telling Esther, pleading with her to go before the king so that the Yehudim won't be killed by Haman. And he says to her, listen, this might be the reason why you're here. Who knows? The doors of Zelophehad, this might be the reason why he only had daughters. So that this situation can happen and an amendment to Torah can be made to salvage and keep alive the name of a man in Israel, that his name be not lost. So that's practically what I was getting from the story. But then I had to, ask the Father, because I know I know he knows. And I know that he's not short-sighted, and I know that this is an opportunity. He was given an opportunity for the doors of Zelophehad to do this thing. But I also think about, was he even watching the others involved? Moshe, Eleazar, and the princess, not implicating them with any kind of blame, but were they given the opportunity to see that there was a short sight, that there was something lacking in this law, and that they would go to Yahweh and say to the Father, what about if a man don't have sons, right? That's another thought that came to me, because the scriptures talk about love. Well, not even love. The scriptures say that we are made in the Father's image and his likeness. And we know that he is love, and he's trying to make us and mold us into his image of his son, and to have the character of the Father, which is love. And one of the things that love says, it doesn't seek its own, right? When all of this was happening, did anyone around them realize that Zelophehad's name was going to be erased out of Israel? Did anyone consider his plight? Did anyone consider his legacy? Did anyone consider any of those things? And we can't say no for sure. We just know no one spoke up. No one interceded for him. And all things go according to the Father's plan, but you still wonder, right? And that's one of the thoughts that came to me. Abba was giving everybody an opportunity to do something, right? To do something. This is how the Father tries us. He tests us, and, he gives us room and opportunities. But at the end of the day, Moshe, giving him the benefit of the doubt, didn't see it. Eleazar, giving him the benefit of the doubt, he didn't see it. The princes, the other 600,000 men that were counted, didn't see it. No one saw about these 5 daughters because it affected them differently, right? So when decision makers are making decisions, be mindful how the decision is going to affect everyone. Think about how often the Father talks about the widow and the fatherless and the poor, because sometimes we don't consider them. We pass laws that don't consider them. I only have daughters, and I remember when they were young and we were doing a lot of the traditional stuff. And at Passover, the tradition was that the youngest son would ask the 4 questions. And I was just like, well, I don't have sons, right? And I remember feeling like, not just for that case, but, again, we were at that stage where a lot of it was tradition. And, the highlight of having sons was always there. And every time someone was pregnant, they wanted to have sons and blah, blah, blah. And, here I am with no sons. And you kind of felt like a second-class citizen because you didn't have sons. But I have what Yahweh wanted me to have. But at the end of the day, these daughters defended their father's name. Defended their father's name. And like I said, that by itself was a whole study. The daughters of Zelophehad, what are we supposed to walk away with, ladies? Talk, speak. Don't be afraid. You know, Yahweh is not a mighty one that is not fair. He is fair. You know, we can bring our cause to Yahweh. We can remind those in authority and power that you're forgetting about me. You're not considering me, right? And allow Yahweh to intercede on our behalf. But if we don't do anything, we don't say anything, then nothing is going to change, right? A sister told me yesterday, a closed mouth doesn't get fed. We have a voice. Unless you were born mute, Yahweh gave us all a voice. And that voice is to be used to express ourselves. And I always tell my children, you can say whatever you want to say to me. You just got to say it respectfully, right? If you don't like something I'm doing, you can tell me, you know, just say it respectfully. And when we address these kind of things, we do it, we follow the path they went. It doesn't imply that there's anything indecent or out of order when they went. They went to the head and they put their case out. They asked a question and they gave a suggestion, and they waited for Yahweh to answer. As a woman, if Yahweh has called you to be one of those daughters of Zelophehad, if he has called you to be that Esther, there's so many women in the Bible that Yahweh has used. Don't be afraid. It's the spirit he put in you. And it makes some people uncomfortable, but pray for them to be able to deal with the spirit that Yahweh put in front of you, that put in you. Because if he's calling you to do great things, it's not just for you, it's for the nation. Because this commandment, this law changed the nation of Israel forever. I pray this lesson was edifying and encouraging. If you have any questions or comments, have you ever felt like you were in that moment of that Zelophehad daughter moment, or that moment of that Esther moment? You know, share your experience in the comments. And as always, it's me, Malcolm Marie, your favorite big sister, mentor, and life coach. Shalom, Queens.